Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Vin Nguyen. I am of the LX Group, and here with me is Bally Bhogal of the LX Group and Natalie Rae of Natalie Rae Consultancy. We're here on this podcast as part of the Apprenticeship Workforce Development Program to discuss how all parties within the apprenticeship field work together to ensure that apprentices complete their programs and what steps can be taken and what measures can be taken to reduce the prospect of any withdrawals from those programs. So, Bally, first and foremost with yourself, would you mind giving us a brief description of what you do? Thank you.
Hi, Vin. Thank you. And thanks for the introduction. Lovely to be back again on this particular podcast, working with Natalie Rae in this particular instance. So, yeah, with regards to this particular programme, my interest is very much from the employers and the apprentices perspective. Really, what needs to be done to ensure that learners are motivated to start their programmes, to finish their programmes. What more can employers do to ensure that learners complete, and also the learner themselves in terms of what is their own responsibility to themselves? How do they hold themselves accountable for staying motivated, staying on programme and getting to completion? So we're really looking at the relationship here as part of the AWD programme between employers and also withdrawals, but equally training providers, what they need to do to make sure that learners stay on programme and everybody works together to minimise apprenticeship withdrawals. So I'll pass over to Natalie now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bally. And Natalie, great to have you here. Would you mind giving us a brief description of what you do, please?
Thank you very much. Really good to be here and to be able to work with you both on this. And thank you for the introduction. Just to follow up from Bally, I'm here to sort of support this conversation around Bally's introduction, but hopefully provide a bit of a lens or insight from my work with providers and what we can do as providers to improve business efficiencies, operational visibility of data and performance, again, to just work towards the overall objective of making sure that we have learners have a good experience with their apprenticeship, stay on programme and complete, and do our bit in helping others to reduce withdrawals overall.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Natalie, as well. And I'm actually going to jump straight into this subject. The term of apprenticeship withdrawal, which doesn't sound very nice, but it's something we're all looking to work to reduce as much as possible. So, Natalie, in simple terms, can you describe what an apprenticeship withdrawal is?
Absolutely. To keep it very simple, withdrawal is where an apprentice leaves or stops taking part in their apprenticeship before completing all elements and aims within that apprenticeship programme. That's known as a permanent withdrawal, and they can't then reinstate into that programme. And then if someone were to take a temporary pause in their apprenticeship, that's also known as a break in learning.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's as clear as can be, but inevitably there's always going to be challenges around this. So I'm particularly interested to hear, what are those challenges? What are the risk factors around apprenticeship withdrawals? This is a question for both of you, particularly from both of your unique perspectives. So Bally, we'll jump to you. What challenges do you think apprentices encounter? And to be honest, all of the other parties involved, what risk factors do they encounter and have to deal with?
Yeah, if I can start with the learner in the first instance, let's face it, they're at the epicenter of the apprenticeship. So the learner comes with their own challenges. You know, when they're coming into an apprenticeship programme, we, or the educational practitioners, the providers, don't necessarily know their background in terms of their own academic history, their challenges perhaps, what's their educational background, literacy and numeracy levels are unknown. So all of these are kind of unknown quantities, and they become a bit of a risk factor unless they become known quantities, and a potential challenge, you know, with regards to staying on programme, maintaining the programme. So there could be everything from, you know, just their background, any particular work that they've done, any educational experience, work experience, their outlook, their aspirations, their own kind of motivations, how motivated are they to learn and get to the end of a programme and complete. But it's also about any particular learning barriers. So is there anything that would completely sort of throw them off course when they're on a long training, a structured programme? These could be even physical barriers, just getting on a bus, frankly, to get to a college. It could be mental health barriers, could be any kind of disability, for example, or learning difficulties and disabilities. So there's lots of challenges and risks or potential risk factors that are unknown to us as practitioners in the educational industry when an apprentice or an aspiring apprentice first comes to us. So we have to find all this out before we actually enroll them onto a programme. With regards to employers, it's about the stability of the actual employer. How ready are they to take on an apprentice, their readiness for apprentices? It's not as easy, if you like, if I can put easy in inverted commas, hypothetical ones, as taking on employees. So apprentices is a protected term in law. Apprentices are a bit more protected in terms of you have to provide learning to them. You have to provide them with time off for learning. You have to provide a coach and mentor, a designated line manager. So there's also a number of challenges that come with just taking on, employing apprentices that a lot of employers may not know about. So there's some potential challenges and risk factors in there that could come into play once on programme. And then it's also about the motivations, the job, the package, the learning environment, the work environment, you know, just the challenges of the day, really, doing the day job. All of these could be risk factors or challenges that start to come out to play once a learner is on programme.
So even with just that, there's evidently a lot of challenges available. Natalie, are there any other challenges that you can think of that haven't been mentioned already?
Absolutely. Just to sort of endorse what Bally said there and just extend it from a provider lens, is that everything that Bally's just explained and more really sits at the accountability of providers. So we can see from what Bally said around the challenges and risk factors related to apprentices or employers, that a lot of them could be deemed in and outside control of the providers, but ultimately the performance impact sits with accountability, of providers. So we're very aware of that responsibility and how much work is involved in doing with that. If we look particularly at the risk factors for providers around some of those challenges that we've identified, a lot of them can relate to things like external or internal intervention, the risk factors around the overall achievement rates and performance data, etc., at the end of each year, where withdrawals have a direct impact on that. It relates to grading through Ofsted inspection or the triggering of further inspection or intervention. And again, just the overall experience of all parties, not just employers and apprentices, but, you know, the provider experience overall and the staff involved. So there's many challenges that are all integrated and interlinked, but it is fair to say that the accountability of making sure all of those things, whether it's from the quality of learning, the financial performance or impact of withdrawals, or even around the compliance aspects, really does sit with the provider to try and manage, mitigate, and obviously promote positive outcomes for all.
Natalie, you placed an emphasis on accountability, which is definitely valid. Would you say that's the most pertinent risk factor involved in this at all?
I think it's up there. I think it's accountability and of all parties to do their bit, but I think the coordination of that, the emphasis, the planning, the structure, the engagement does sit at the hands of the providers. They have got a tall task to make sure that everything moves quickly. I know Bally and I do, external training and stuff, and I think there's always about what we can do, how much engagement we could get from apprentices and how to engage better with employers. But that all sits at the accountability of being driven by the provider, and I think that's the point I was trying to make there, is clear accountability sits with the providers, and even with their best intentions, sometimes some of those things are external and out of their control.
Sounds great. Bally, would you agree? It's pretty clear that accountability is a major factor in this, but I was interested to know from yourself, Bally, what do you think from your perspective would be the most prominent risk factors involved here?
Absolutely agree with everything that Natalie said. From an accountability perspective, there's so many different lenses on training providers in particular. If you like, there's the Ofsted lens from an inspection perspective, there's the compliance lens from an education skills funding agency, ESFA perspective. There's also the accountability framework that when Natalie's referred to as performance and finances and the experience, sort of learner satisfaction, employer satisfaction, all of that is actually included within there. So there's so many different lenses on the training provider, but she also mentioned there's a lot that's outside of their control, which is where the learner as an entity, it can be quite a complex entity sometimes, and employers and business at the minute in the turbulent times that we have can be very complex. Some businesses, unfortunately, might go bump in the night, which is a big risk factor to apprenticeships and has a direct impact on apprenticeship withdrawals. So the economy is one other risk factor. Politics and politicians, educational policy, that's another risk factor. Again, that, you know, is out of your hands in terms of a training provider. Funding rules, increasing costs. There's so many different external factors that are outside of the control of providers that effectively have a direct relationship with the potential for apprentices to withdraw. That makes this such a complex yet such a fascinating area, because apprenticeships are key to this country. They're key to jobs, they're key to social mobility, job mobility, prospects, but equally they are a very kind of difficult, kind of complex project, if you like, program to deliver at the same time. So hopefully there's a few other little anecdotes in there that help.
I'm sure there are plenty. Natalie, was there anything else that you wanted to add? Because like I said in the beginning, we all come from very unique perspectives here. So were there any factors in particular that you yourself encountered more than any others?
No, I think so. I think Bally's certainly covered or extended on their kind of that external lens. But if we take that a little bit more internally around, rather than just what we're measured about outside of our control, and again, that has direct impact on insider provision. But the factors that affect apprenticeship withdrawals internally is about, you know, staffing issues, resources, all of those sort of business aspects of running a business and being able to deliver on your promise. You know, the coordination of learning, the schedule of teaching, all of those provision elements. And I think we can see with sort of recent feedback from some surveys about learner experience and stuff about the reasons why they're withdrawing. There's a lot of feedback that sort of suggests it's about that poorly or badly run provision. So if we bring what Bally said, the external influences have direct impact on whether a provision is run or can be run well. So I think it's important to bring that lens into the conversation about all the moving parts internally that are required as well. But that's not to say that there isn't things and strategies that can be put in place to improve performance and quick wins and streamlining, you know, connectivity of activity or flow of information and improve engagement. So there are some really good strategies which we will surely explore within this conversation. But it is appropriate to set the scene to say there's an awful lot of influencing factors internally and externally and moving parts to make apprenticeship outcomes a success.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Bally, you did mention where you addressed the impact it had on the learners in regards to these risk factors. I wanted to ask about the employers as well at this stage. Where do they come into this issue? How do they relate to this at all, the employers specifically?
Employers are absolutely critical, Vin, to ensuring apprentices kind of start and make it to the end. They have such a big part to play. And I don't think they don't know that, but sometimes you do get pockets of employers that perhaps haven't really engaged with the apprenticeship. There is sometimes you get instances where apprentices think, oh, we've got an apprentice that's now part of our team, and frankly they belong, or they're with a training provider, so the training provider is going to deliver the training to them, look after them, and at some point we will get a fully fledged employee. And it doesn't work like that. It hasn't worked like that for a long while. Some years ago it might have been the case where training providers came in and delivered qualifications, and that was considered the bulk of the work done. But ever since the reforms in 2017, this has really changed, and there has to be input by employers. Natalie mentioned earlier, just with design challenges. So sometimes learners can be off-put by the programme. They don't see it as actually relative to their role, relative to their department, relative to the business. But that's probably down to lack of employer input. So you can start there, if you like, with making sure that an apprenticeship program is actually relevant to the learner, is actually relevant to their job, is embedded within the business, the department. Like, this is a great opportunity. Squeeze as much as you possibly can out of it by making it applicable to your business. So employers are super important here, because frankly, they're the ones that are providing the job. They're the employers, they're providing the employment, the apprentice is their employee. They have to ensure the safety of the learner. They have to ensure the well-being of that learner, both at work and during the learning process. And I think it's down to the type of employer you get as well, in terms of how do they consider learning? How do they consider themselves in terms of learning, training and development of their own workforce? Do they consider themselves as learning organisations, or do they take more of a hands-off approach? And what we're seeing a lot more, especially with apprenticeships, that the ones that have really good case studies and testimonials and feedback and brilliant apprenticeship experience are the employers that are really into learning, development, providing opportunities, even providing opportunities where individuals are allowed to make mistakes but learn from those mistakes. So, you know, those sorts of environments are super important. Line managers that are very supportive become extremely important. And then just knowing the commitment that it takes to enroll or to, well, employ an apprentice in the first place, enroll them onto a program, making sure that they see the program from start right through to end, and keeping them supported, keeping them motivated. There's a massive role for employers and line managers to take in this. Sometimes they don't know their commitment and what they're actually signing up for, and I think that could be one of the areas where the sort of issues start to creep in, and obviously where you get the conflicting demands of the day job. So when you've got the targets, they're coming in on you, the work is coming down on you, the training almost kind of starts to take a sidestep and starts to move down the priority list, and then that's where the problems creep in, which can then effectively lead to, you know, just, you know, breaks in learnings, breaks in learning, and then potential withdrawals. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what can potentially happen at the employer's end, which is so interdependent with what a training provider and also an apprentice actually does and needs in terms of this tri-party working together, these three parties working together.
So there's a lot that they're able to do, evidently so, but it makes perfect sense. Natalie, I'd like to hone back in on the keyword that you used, which was accountability. I think I agree with both of you that all parties involved have accountability. Employers do, especially with the amount of input and influence that they have on the apprenticeship that they are providing to the apprentice. Now, Natalie, you did start to allude to this, and let's discuss this in full right now. What exactly is the solution? What actions can each party take to reduce these the potential for withdrawals? Natalie, I'm particularly interested in your inputs on this. What would you say are the possible solutions and steps to be taken?
I think there's many. I think again it comes down to the lens conversation. So if I look at it through a provider lens to answer initially, and then, you know, Bally might come in to sort of talk about it a little bit more from an employer and apprentice point of view. But I think to start that, just following on from what Bally said, I think there's been a huge positive shift in the sector over recent years around the raising the profile of apprenticeships, etc., and the benefit they do. But I think there's still much work to be done as well. And that's something that, you know, we all have a responsibility to do, whether it's apprentices, providers, employers, or other external stakeholders, to continue to sort of challenge misconceptions around apprenticeships and to sort of raise the profile of the benefit to them, and share those success stories about the impact that they have on not only learner level careers and experience, but the impact they make on employers, but also out to the skills industry or to the labour market or the employment market. So I think that's a really important action that we've all got to find ways to influence over time, and hopefully this programme and work like this does continue to do that. But to narrow it down, like I said, to a provider point of view, from an actions to be taken, I think the main thing that I try and see in my work or stress at the moment is that I think we have to sort of make sure that in our actions with regards to providers improving their performance, that there is investment into the time required to make sure that we really look at operational practice, business efficiencies, the accuracy of data and the flow of communication through the organisation. I think when we look at intervention or improvement strategies, we typically, from a provider point of view, look at the improvement in quality of teaching and learning. We'll talk about engagement, better engagement with attendance from apprentices and engagement with employers, and they all represent key actions that providers need to support, initiate or direct for improvement. But I think more often than not, sometimes there isn't enough of a spotlight on working practices and making sure that we're using all the information that is available to us to increase the visibility of really important performance data that is available to providers to make informed decisions. And I talk often about the difference between what we will call, for the purpose of this, operational data, which is that kind of on-programme learning insights information that is available to providers, and then also the headline data that we'll talk about, which is the slightly more lagged sort of ILR data. And I think a key action for people to take away is to look at sort of what visibility they've got and try and align that data so that they can make better informed forecasts, whether it be financially or forecasts around performance and outcomes, but also to be able to identify an earlier opportunity, challenges at learner level, course level or provision level to make appropriate interventions. So the biggest action I think to take away is that kind of systems review, that data and reporting review. Are providers doing enough to make sure that they've got all the information that is available to them centralised and visible, and therefore collectively informing the business and operational or intervention decisions that they've got to make?
Understood, thank you. And you've raised a really interesting point in regards to making better informed decisions and having the data in which to do so. Hypothetically, let's say that information was able to be provided to them. How much faith would you have in providers in general to take full advantage of that data to make those decisions? Because it might not be the case where they are aware of the best decision to make, but they don't have the capacity to do so. Of course, there's some level of compromise there. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that apprenticeship providers would push back on that? Do you think on some level they're already aware of what they need to do, but they're having to compromise too much? Do you think there are other barriers in place because of that?
Yeah, I think it's a very broad question that I wouldn't want to make a sweeping generalisation, but I think there's work to be done around data visibility across the sector. I think what exists in apprenticeship provision, and this is across different entities, different provider types, is there isn't centralised one system that operates in the way with the functionality that apprenticeship providers need. They've got multiple different systems for different parts of the apprenticeship journey. And so it would be very provider specific to be able to answer that question. But generally, we do see that what that doesn't lend itself to is the flow of information or the centralisation of data or the alignment, like I said, of that on-programme insight and intelligence against the sort of headline data that we're used to use, and where we can work with providers, or providers can work to sort of create better centralisation or visibility of that. Then they're going to have access to information to make those informed decisions. In answer to your question a little bit more specifically, yes, wrapping around that again at provider specific level would be an assessment of do people then know what to do about sort of being informed from that data and from that performance visibility? Is there sort of knowledge gaps, or is there sort of coaching and support that needs to be done to be able to do that? But I think everyone does and would sort of champion being able to make sure that the way in which our systems sometimes create barriers for effective provision management or performance management, I'm sure everyone across the board would support being able to get better visibility and access to that information.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Natalie. Bally, I know when it comes to making better informed decisions and analysis of data, this is something within your purview as well. I wanted to get your thoughts very briefly on this, please, because Natalie has raised a fantastic point here. In regards to using the data to make better informed decisions, is that something you can get on board on as well? Is that something you would champion too? Is there any particular sector? Do you feel that this is something to take a top priority? What are your thoughts on more data-driven decisions here in the apprenticeship sector?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really tough in this industry because Natalie mentioned multiple systems, and I think that's it can be a good thing, obviously, to give you the sight lines, but equally it can be the downfall as well, in terms of there's just too many moving parts. You know, even if you just look at the employers, the learners, they're moving parts in themselves, and then just within the training provider, there's the staff, there's the processes, there's the practice, there's the systems, there's the procedures, again, moving parts. It's a really difficult one, and it's hard to get data. It's really difficult in amongst all of those different systems to get data that actually give you the snapshot at any one time. Like, you really have to work hard to make sure that there's synchronization with all your systems, across your systems and within systems. And I'm talking from my experience, having worked in colleges and private training providers, as well as working with training provider clients as well, and what we see during audits and other types of work and consultancy work, etc. But I really wanted to bring also the employers into this, that employers often cry out that I want to see you know, my apprentices progress. I'm not really quite sure where they're at, but they sometimes are given access to e-portfolios, learner management systems, so specific LMSs, and they could log into those and have a look to see where's my learner at, where is the learner at. So, you know, are they on red or green, or you know, whatever it might be. I think I've even seen blue of late to show that these are new learners coming on program at a certain provider that we've worked with. So there's all sorts of color coding that kind of can come into it. But if you just take the traditional RAG rating, so employers can get access to this information to help advise them and appraise them better of where their learners are at, and that would help them to reduce any kind of potential of breaks in learning and also withdrawals. I think there's the whole element around employers just being interested, taking an interest, active interest, turning up to review meetings, turning up to coach, mentor, advise apprentices. So, for example, I'll give you a little example from years ago. So I used to work for a training provider, and we had a number of apprentices in our department. And as part of the challenge, Braithwaite Challenge, we were going to go up to Cumbria. And so they were working towards all of this great stuff with presentation skills, putting presentations together, kind of practicing, doing all sorts of fundraising and things. And then, you know, all sorts of emails flying everywhere. And I had an email one day, I came into work, and there was an email there which says, "So, Bally." And I was quite taken aback. And so I ended up then doing a bit of a session around how to write professional emails, so work emails, professional letters, professional emails, and how to start and finish those, and how to address people and how to sign off. So just things like that. So just employers and line managers being ready to mentor apprentices, that's quite important as well. But yeah, definitely get into those systems, use them where you can. I don't think any training provider will say to an employer line manager that if we've given you access, we don't want you to use them. Of course, if you're turning up to progress reviews, which is a big thing for employers and a big expectation, as well as part of the commitment, then fill out your line manager box, the comments that you're given, the opportunity to provide some feedback on how your apprentices are developing from a knowledge perspective, from a behavioral ethic perspective, as a well-rounded individual within the business, within the department, as part of their role, and also how their skills are developing. Take that time, and also, you know, give that reward and recognition, recognize them. All of this makes a massive difference, and actually it's so obvious, but actually it helps to reduce withdrawals. So Natalie mentioned earlier that there's been some research undertaken into why apprentices withdraw, and part of it, the experience, or part of the feedback, has been the experience also from employers perspective. So just lack of motivation, lack of input, lack of support is the big one from their line managers. But equally, Natalie's also mentioned that you get the same from the training providers, so lack of support from tutors and trainers, you know, lack of input into that design. So these are things that generally, if the two parties work together, they can correct. It's not impossible not to correct. It's almost about finding the time, finding the airtime, working out your commitments from both ends, working together. So it's about building those better relationships to reduce withdrawals.
Just on that last note, Bally, thank you again. On the last note, have you seen that in practice still? Have you seen people working together in that capacity?
Yeah. Probably one of the best examples we've had is just in a recent piece of work we did with the university, and they set the tone right from the start. So right from employer engagement, that very first meeting when they sit down with an employer to say, look, okay, so what were you looking for in apprenticeships? Why would you want to introduce apprenticeship programs here? And apprentices, have you ever managed apprentices before? Have you ever, used your levy for specific types of programs? And the conversation is very much solutions based. So how is the apprenticeship going to take some of your pains away, basically? So if you're, for example, experiencing issues around recruitment, if you like, then an apprenticeship is a great way to solve that. If it's around equality, diversity, then apprenticeship is a great vehicle to try and diversify the workforce. If it's succession planning, equally the same, by association, taking individuals into the pipeline early, providing them with the early careers, moving them up the food chain through apprenticeships as a vehicle can potentially solve your succession issues in 5 to 6 years time. For the aging workforce, the problems that are either happening now or looming on the horizon. So going back to your question, best example has been setting the tone right from the start, and then, as Natalie's alluded to it, everybody working operationally within their work practices and almost being accountable for that this is how we set the tone. This is how we work with our employers. These are our expectations of employers when working with learners. And we almost won't accept anything less than this from both parties working together.
Thank you so much, Bally. Natalie, you did already mention some solutions that the parties can take to reducing apprenticeship withdrawals. I wanted to know of any examples of best practice that you've witnessed around these steps that you mentioned before. Have you witnessed any at all?
Of course, absolutely. And again, just to follow on from Bally, I have the privilege to work with multiple different teams in different settings, and something that definitely comes through in all the work that I do, or even how we've been supporting the AWD programme so far, is it's nothing but willing teams that are conscientious, that want to do well, that do the jobs in apprenticeship provision, all the different range of jobs, because they care and they're ambitious and they've got good intentions around it. I think where I see best practice is where organisations, institutions, providers, however you want to call them, have a commitment to trying to improve the functionality within business operational activity or data and systems, as we've already talked about, to improve the functionality, to give the teams capability to perform better within their role. I think rather than just laying on action after action, when we have a review about being able to facilitate our teams with automated processes, visibility of data, systems that track and automate sort of process tracking rather than the manual admin and sort of processing that's required, where we can reduce the workloads of our teams, and then they can actually have dedicated time to actually go out and do the role that they need to do and intervene where we need them to. That's really good practice, and that is, I think, our way forward with regards to reducing withdrawal numbers and improving the experience and outcomes overall. So I think best practice is when that lens is considered in an action plan or a quality improvement plan as well. But to give you a few more maybe specific details of things that I've seen or things that I've worked with more recently based around the withdrawal picture, I just had a few to note actually. So I think where I work with clients, or we've seen clients where they do routine and detailed analysis of their reasons around withdrawals. And what I mean by that, it's not just an annual review of withdrawal reasons at the end of a contract year to inform the SAR, where really those interventions may be late by the time the SAR has been completed or the quality improvement plan for the next year has been completed. But there is routine withdrawal analysis happening on within the programme on a monthly basis, termly basis, however you like to do it. And it goes down to really detailed reasons as to why students are withdrawing. So that, again, that's data that's available to providers, that's information that's available to providers that can inform timely intervention and improvements rather than a slightly more lagged approach to that. So it's a really good way to sort of implement change, is to make sure that there's dedicated time and capacity within the teams to do that analysis to inform operational practice and improvements moving forward. I think another specific example around the management of withdrawals is around having breaking learning policies. So are providers doing what they need to do to make sure that there is key performance or practice expectations around the management of breaking learning? So have they got a return within 30-60 day policy? Do they have keep in touch meetings with those learners where appropriate that are on breaking learning, because their breaking learnings are at higher risk of withdrawal at a later date? Again, do our those learners that are on temporary suspension or breaking learnings, are they still in our visibility when we do caseload reviews, and we haven't lost sight of them, so that we're managing them as if they still live in our caseloads? So that's another sort of workable example that I'm starting to see people, and I do sort of champion, gets integrated. And the final point to answer that, just with some specific strategy or a specific reason or example, is where Bally and probably I have already mentioned about the sort of external influencing factors. We are at the mercy of the employment market when we work with apprenticeships. They are work-based, business-based educational programmes, as we all know. So where there's moving parts that sit outside and we're under the influence and at the mercy of those, then we have to remain responsive. But what we can see in the market, the employment market over recent years, and certainly at the moment, is that there's a lot of movement in the employment market, maybe more so than there was years ago. And it's about, again, being proactive against that knowledge and those insights coming forward. So another thing really that I think is really good practice that we try and champion through our work is to make sure that there is a really early identification of a loss of employment, what I would call a loss of employment notification. So based on that market intelligence telling us that there's movement, are we being told as operational teams, management teams, coaches, whatever roles, at the earliest opportunity that someone is at risk of losing that employment or have lost that employment for whatever reason? Typically, we see that the providers will wait to that change of employment status, and that's where we sort of pick up things. But if we think someone's going to be moving, or they're giving us sort of insight that they will, there's things that we can do to notify some of our central teams or our wider support teams within providers to work collaboratively to prevent that withdrawal. So a loss of employment notification going into operational teams being sent straight out to our business development, employer engagement teams means that we can work collectively within our work to try and prevent that student from then falling off their programme and getting them replaced. So hopefully there's just a sort of a general overview there and a few specific examples to answer your question.
It most certainly does. Thank you so much, Natalie. And I did want to touch very briefly to dive into, the aspects of business more with yourself, Bally, such things as business targets, KPIs, the culture around the business. Bally, in your experience, have you dealt with many employers who have had to, have had that in conflict with the apprentices due to their business culture or the targets that they're needing to meet? Has there ever been an issue for you when you've dealt with employers at all?
Yeah, very much. I think I kind of alluded to it before, that how do you explain probably the best way for me is, what is an employer's readiness for taking on apprentices? Apprenticeships are a complex program. They are enshrined in government policy. I said they're a protected term, a protected product. You cannot just run an apprenticeship program of your own. So there's a lot that employers think that they know about apprenticeships that they don't, and unfortunately it just becomes a lot of myth busting still that needs to happen. I think we are starting to move away from that sort of traditional thinking that the apprenticeships or apprenticeship programs are just for young people. So there's a little less of that now than what used to be. So there's had to be a lot of education just around that. But even with regards to working with apprentices, how ready is an employer really? And when we talk about readiness of employers, have they got the right job? Well, they've got a job, let's put it that way. Let's say they've got the vacancy, but does the vacancy align with the apprenticeship standard or align as well as it possibly can? So that could be your first stumbling block. So for example, I've worked with employers that either often have too narrow a role and it doesn't cover enough of the breadth and depth of the apprenticeship standard, or it's too wide, it's just too broad and it doesn't go deep enough. So there, right from the start, it could be a potential problem that needs aligning before you've even got started. So the role, the alignment with the apprenticeship standard, procuring the right training provider as well. So finding the right provider, finding the right apprenticeship can often be the issue, and then finding the best apprentice for the job. So going through the recruitment and being involved in that recruitment, asking the right questions, setting the right sort of minimum criteria, if you like, if you apply that, the prerequisite criteria. There's so much that you have to go through to get an apprenticeship right. And then there's everything within the actual employer in terms of job, the learning environment, the job environment, the line manager, their capabilities. So Natalie talked about capability of staff within the training provider organization, but equally we can mirror this to what's the line manager's capability and capacity to be able to manage, I don't know, 1 to 20, 1 to 50, however many apprentices they might have. So there's everything to be reviewed around their capability and their capacity. We see some employer providers train their own line managers. So that's really good practice that we see around apprenticeships, around compliance, around quality, around how to coach and mentor. Frankly, if something like that was available all of the time to all line managers and they had the time to improve their own knowledge and capability, that would be useful as well in helping this particular area of discussion to minimise withdrawals and potential breaks in learning. Shouldn't really say, might be a bit contentious, but the manager themselves can be the problem as to why apprentices might leave or move on. Natalie's alluded to that. They move jobs, they move out of area, they might be at risk of redundancy, but equally they might be moving on because of conditions within the business themselves. So there's lots of things in and outside of the control, but there's lots of things that employers can do. I think for me, the culture becomes really important. I don't think it will come as any surprise that where the culture around learning, development, being allowed to make those mistakes, being allowed to go away, take time to learn, come back and apply it. Those are the best sort of cultures where it's not going to be difficult to embed apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs and work with employers to make them applicable to the business environment, applicable to the business and also the department and the learner. You just need willing people from both ends, training provider as well as from the employer's end, to work together to create the programs which are going to be in the best interest of the learner.
And of course, the motivation and consistency from the learner themselves. I'm sure as one member of the party, I will say as a learner myself previously, having completed an apprenticeship, I didn't have to consider any of this. It's a huge amount of information that everyone has to consider. And I hope everyone on this podcast listening in understands that. And I'm sure they do, and understands that other people are in the same boat as them. But thank you so much again, Bally, for your input. And I just wanted to finish off now. Let's say any employers are listening to this podcast, which there will be plenty of. Which one action would make a massive difference today or now to reducing any of those withdrawals? Natalie, let's start with yourself. What is that one action for them to take?
I think it sounds quite simple, but I appreciate that it's there's a lot involved in it. But apprenticeships don't work unless 3 parties are involved. And I think the one entity in that 3-way relationship that needs to sort of drive and collaborate and be involved more is employers. I think there's some employers can sort of think that it's something that the apprentice or their staff member does 1 day a week with the training provider. So why one call to action would be to find every opportunity to engage with the provider and work with them. To as minimum support the apprentice and turn up to progress reviews, but to get a keen interest around working with providers to make sure that the programs offered work for them and their industry. There's so many opportunities for them to be involved and inform sort of educational practice or the program. So it would be to look at opportunities, whether it's to attend forums or National Apprenticeship Week, or even down to operationally engaging with the reviews, to just try and be as engaged and work collaborative as possible with the training provider to support the apprenticeship. And in turn, what that would do will indirectly or directly raise the profile of apprenticeships throughout their organisation, which is needed for the sector, but also for the apprentices themselves.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And Bally, what is that one action that employers need to take to reduce apprenticeship withdrawals?
I think for me, if it was one, and it's really difficult because you can't just take one action, we've had to select one, I would say select your line managers of apprentices very carefully. So just be very selective about who your line manager is, and make sure that they are the nurturing types, the kind of developmental types, that they want to take time out from their own day jobs to develop the next generation, that they are those types of line managers, the kind of more coaching and mentoring types. I think that one action will make a huge amount of difference to reducing apprenticeship withdrawals. That's my one I've gone with.
No problem at all. I was actually going to add my own input onto that as well. And I think for learners, it's actually a very similar answer to yours, Bally, is that it is an investment in terms of time, money, and business hours into the learners themselves. And they need to understand that. They are a commodity. They are an asset to the company at the end of the day. And learners need to understand and appreciate that. And the best way to do so is to invest into the learner and understand that apprenticeship is arguably one of the best ways to do so. So with that, we'll finish off. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, to Natalie. Thank you so much for your invaluable input. And of course, to Bally as well. Fantastic input. Also, my name is Vin. Thank you for listening to this podcast and take care. Thank you so much.